Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at what's coming to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I am your host, Tanya Shrum, and we are joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome to you both. Hope you're having a wonderful week so far.
So far.
We're halfway through.
I know. Knocking wood.
I'm doing well, and I'm really looking forward to all of the stories coming to this week's journal. Thad, would you like to get us started on what's coming to this week's cover story?
Yeah, this week we have our annual Foilies Awards, which aren't really ours. They're compiled by the folks at Muckrock News and the Electronic Frontier Foundation, two nonprofits that don't generally do journalism and kind of individual reporting, but do a lot of stuff, a lot of access to information, access to public meeting stuff that aids newspapers and newsrooms in getting access to public information. So two awesome national nonprofits every year collaborate to put together the Foilies, which is comes out Sunshine Week typically, which was actually last week. We're a little bit late to the game because we had another themed issue last week that we were kind of bound to run, but never too late to celebrate government transparency and talk about these sunshine laws that are so important for maintaining just the public's right to know and public access to government meetings and government documents. And so what the Foilies does every year is kind of gives out these tongue-in-cheek awards to the worst offenders. So the worst government agencies, the most obstructive. Generally, there's a couple outliers, which I'll get to one in a moment, but generally kind of, just showcasing the worst actors in government transparency nationally as a way to just raise awareness about what these public access rights are that we have and kind of celebrate these laws that really maintain, we the people's right to maintain control over the entities that we've created to help us, which is what government is. So the one I really want to highlight is we are living, unfortunately, in this new wave of book banning, and so my personal favorite award this year from the Foilies was the Literary Judicial Thrashing of the Year Award, which went to the Penridge, Pennsylvania School District. And so this was a district that just the library staff took to trying to ban books, but then they couldn't actually get the school board to pass rules outlawing certain books of the library. And so they just took it upon themselves then to perpetually check out certain books. And when they kind of got in trouble for doing it, they started doing it under students' names, which got them even more trouble. And finally, the matter went to court, and the judge brilliantly just kind of peppered his ruling with lines taken out and references to banned books. So it was just apparently a wonderful ruling to read, and certainly in the spirit of the Foilies. So that was my favorite, but there's a whole bunch of them in the paper, and then we have even an extended edition online. So I really encourage folks to check it out. And I will remind folks also that the 2023 Foilies, our own Humboldt County Sheriff's Office landed on the list for redacting names from its own press releases when they were given out in response to a Public Records Act request. So every once in a while, Humboldt County, makes the big time.
That's not a dare.
No, they don't need any encouragement. Speaking of which, this seems like a perfect pivot to the editorial we ran this week, which is, ironic to run adjacent to Sunshine Week, but it is about our own local current bad actor in the transparency, in the world of government transparency, and that goes to the Eureka City School Board. So as regular readers, viewers, listeners, all I'm sure are tired of hearing we've been taking a deep dive into trying to figure out what's going on with Eureka City Schools' property exchange agreement that it entered into with this mysterious LLC, AMG Communities Jacobs LLC, to divest the district of the old Jacobs Middle School campus. So the agreement, for those who don't recall, is that the district is getting rid of that 8 acres of that property in exchange for a $5.35 million cash payment and a small residential duplex on I Street. And as we reported before, the deal is kind of mysterious and there's really not much known about it. And it also, in doing this, the Eureka City Schools Board, in classifying this as a property exchange rather than just a sale, it kind of sidestepped this really regimented process that government entities need to do to divest themselves of public property. And all these kind of transparency protections and just taxpayer protections to make sure that it is doing due diligence in how any government agency is doing due diligence in how it gets rid of public property, because that's our property too, right? But what we really kind of try to hone in on in this piece is that amid this kind of controversial decision, Eureka City School Board members have first just referred like all interview requests back to the superintendent's office. And so we kind of thought, oh, fair enough, we'll ask to interview the school board but through the superintendent's office. And then we get word back that they've all declined to be interviewed and are referring all questions to the current superintendent, Gary Stortz, who I'll remind folks, took over the position, after the City Schools Board made this decision. So we just have the situation where elected officials, these are folks that, are answerable to the public. They're elected into this office, make a controversial decision and then refuse to both, release any real detailed information about it. It seems increasingly because they don't really have any. It seems like the school district did not do any due diligence to figure out who AMG Communities is or what resources they have or what other projects they've been associated with. But none of these elected officials are willing to stand up and answer questions and actually talk to the public through the media about, this decision they've made. And they instead are directing questions to their staff, which is just absolute opposite of transparency. And I'll just add that they had the gall to, a week after this agreement was made, send out a press release pledging their, commitment to transparency and accountability. So.
And meanwhile, all we kept getting is a twilled mustache.
Indeed. And, the point that we make at the end of the editorial, Jen and our digital editor, Kimberly Weir, wrote it with me, is just that, these folks are not being transparent and they should be held accountable. And this is something that Eureka voters should remember when they're up for re-election next.
Well, Thad, I really appreciated this article. I think that everybody should pick up a copy of this week's journal and read the entire collaboration between the staff. I also just wanted to note really quick that I was very disgusted that my home state of Virginia ended up in the article multiple times on the cover story.
I didn't realize you were Virginian, but yeah, Virginia was way disproportionately represented in the Foilies this year.
Ooh, the Foilies were Virginia ham-baked.
Before we swap topics, I just want to very quickly give credit where it's due and say that the metaphor of the Muppet Man in the editorial is all Thad. The possibility that we will find eventually that the folks behind the LLC are in fact a stack of Muppets in a trench coat. That's Thad's prediction.
I really appreciated that metaphor. I didn't know if we were going to hold it as suspense for the readers, but I think it's good to let the Muppet out of the bag now.
Listen, doing my due diligence, I looked it up to just confirm some Muppet Man stuff happening, and in fact, surprisingly, they placed Fozzie at the top of the stack. It's a bold move. Yeah.
Should be noted that Fozzie declined to comment, citing attorney-client privilege.
Yeah, he did not return journal emails or phone calls. not into transparency.
Nah.
Well, I appreciate the entire journal staff trying to reach transparency for the rest of the public. And before we switch over to some more tasty subjects, Thad, would you also like to discuss the one other really nice article we'd like to highlight this week?
Yeah, Tanya, I am fond of saying at the Journal that we have one bias that we'll happily admit to, which is reform, just kind of the idea that everything can work better and be better, and governments can be more functional and all that stuff. I'm going to admit to a second today is I'm biased in favor of newspapers, and so when I heard that the folks at the Humboldt County Historical Society had embarked on this really big effort to preserve 20 years worth of time standards. I was just immediately kind of interested in what they were going to do with them and whatnot. And so it's kind of long story short, when the Time Standard outsourced its printing, its on-site printing to Chico, it purged what are called the morgues, which is just like the storage it has of back issues, and was going to throw them away. And so the folks at the Clark Museum and volunteers with the Clark Museum and the Historical Society kind of got together to salvage what was, I think, like 30,000 copies of back editions of the Time Standard. And so spent months and months last year, I think 1,000+ volunteer hours sorting through all these editions, and have come up with basically a complete set of the paper from 1995 through 2015 that they're going to work to digitize. And scan so they can have color PDFs that folks can search through and go back and find, that the picture of the high school basketball championship, or that time their business sold, or whatever they want to commemorate. But they are holding 3 events out at the Timber Heritage Society's Samoa facility where these extra editions are being held. And so for the next 3 Saturdays, they're going to be giving away kind of the duplicate copies and inviting folks from the public to kind of come thumb through the stacks and look at all these old editions of the Time Standard, partly with the idea that they want to display them somehow. They want to come up with kind of an exhibit that showcases, what folks find interesting about this 2-decade chunk of newspaper history of Humboldt County. And so they're inviting folks to come out, look through them, and kind of come up with ideas of whether they want to, do just kind of highlight kind of the milestone moments in Humboldt County from these 20 years, or if they want to create, kind of poster boards with on different themes, how homelessness was covered over this 20-year period, or how the timber industry was covered, things like that. So I think it's kind of an exciting project. And I'll just note that, I spent 8 years working at the Time Standard as a reporter, so this is one that kind of, hits close to home for me, and I have probably too many boxes of newspapers in my garage too, full disclosure. So this was one I got to nerd out on, and I'm actually going to head out there with some former Time Standard colleagues on Saturday, I believe, to kind of thumb through and reminisce. So I encourage folks to see us out there and to get some duplicate copies.
Absolutely. And this is a calling for all the visual artists to come up with some inspiration.
Absolutely.
Well,
also, I'll just add, if you have a massive paper mache project that you want to get done, this is your chance.
So true.
Absolutely. And thank you, Thad. And again, I encourage everyone to pick up this week's journal and read all of the stories cover to cover and preserve them for later. And with that, we are going to turn to Jennifer and see what's not cooking this week.
Indeed. Let's talk about what's raw, because I don't know how much sushi you have been eating lately.
Oh, I just never can get enough. Who can? Who can?
I know. So the Sushi Blue restaurant up in Blue Lake Casino has a new head chef, a new executive chef, and it is Pang Nu Vang. And I spoke to her this week, and a lot about our conversation really struck me as interesting about sushi in Humboldt, sushi in general, sushi in the world, sushi in America, et cetera, et cetera. So let me tell you first a little bit about Pang Nu Vang, who sometimes goes by PN. She is let me see, I guess you would say like a lifetime sushi chef, because she started at the tender age of 18. She was originally working for doing dishes and stuff like that at the original Kyoto restaurant, run by Kyoko and George Clark. And lots of people are very nostalgic about that restaurant. Anyway, when it became Masaki's Kyoto restaurant, run by Eric and Jenny Masaki, as she put it, as PN put it, they realized what a terrible waitress I am. And apparently having what she calls the mouth of a sailor, I wouldn't know, was not great for waiting tables. And not everyone liked the sassy little jokes she wrote on their receipts. So they moved her into the kitchen, because that's where, the rough talk is allowed, is in kitchens and newsrooms. So she moved into there, and from 18, she started learning to roll sushi and eventually worked her way up. She's worked in Sushi Spot. She's worked in a handful of restaurants in Portland, and now she is heading up Sushi Blue. A thing that struck me as interesting is that in general, I mean, when we look at chefs in general, much less those who win awards and things like that, and Michelin stars, when we look at chefs in general, it's a male-dominated industry, right? We have this weird paradox where, like, the stereotype is that women should be home cooking, like that women do most of the cooking in households, in family households. But when it comes to professional work, once there's money involved, then it's man's work. This is slowly changing, but nowhere more glacially paced than in the world of sushi. I think in the entire 10 years I lived in Japan, I saw maybe one woman behind the counter. It's very much a man's field. It's considered man's work. Hilariously, and I talked to PN about this, there are all kinds of ideas about why women can't make sushi.
Jennifer, the one thing that you put in there, you're going to bring up right now, but I was like...
that your hands are too warm to handle the fish.
Wow.
Which I'm like, tell me you have never had physical contact with a woman without telling me you've never had physical contact with a woman. The other thing, like, what are we, like, just simmering things? Am I frying eggs on my palms? I have heard from men that in Japan that women are not strong enough to make nigiri sushi, that we lack the muscle, which apparently you need to be able to crush a car to do in your hands. So anyway, that nonsense continues and is pervasive in sushi. And she certainly found that in Portland, where she said, first of all, being a woman and being gay, she said, I was not going to be accepted as part of their team. When she worked with more, I say traditional Japanese chefs, but traditional in the sense of, bad habits and misogyny, not so much cuisine necessarily. But an interesting thing about Humboldt County is that she was very much invited to work in the kitchen, and her skill set was appreciated and encouraged. And the people who taught her, as she went through from different shops, she spent 10 years at Masaki's, were Evangeline Johnson, I think it is. I want to make sure I have her name right. And Noelani Davis, women. And Kyoko was the one running the shop. So, she's had a lot of mentorship with women. And she also mentioned to me that at Sushi Spot, she learned a great deal from Junko Otani, who is a long-time Sushi Spot person. And every step of the way, it's really been, women teaching her and encouraging her, men as well. But as far as her main teachers, her main mentors, it's been women. However, I don't see lots of hype about women chefs, sushi chefs in Humboldt. Maybe we should have more hype about that because it's different. It's different than anywhere else. And so she's now leading up the spot where you may recall Jacob Talbert, whom Blue Lake brought in from Hawaii and other places and Sonoma and whatnot. And they made a big deal of him coming in. She is keeping his menu for now. That's the menu that he developed and that has been very popular. But she worked for about a year under him. But she is looking forward to doing some newer things in there as well. And we talked about what kinds of, things that she's doing, maybe like down the line in the menu, but right now just as specials. And her thing is more kind of traditional sushi in the sense of having kind of tasting one thing at a time. Yeah. So what you're not going to find in Japan or in a very traditional shop in America is a lot of sauce. Like sometimes 3 rolls come to the table and you don't know whose is whose because they are all covered in sauce. Right? And people in Humboldt and Portland apparently really love sauce. And, you'll get a roll that's like 10 different kinds of fish on it and you're just like eating it by the mouthful and you kind of don't taste individually what you're having. The more traditional approach to sushi, even in contemporary sushi, where things are being done new and sauces are used, is about isolating a flavor or pairing it with another flavor and maybe just less going on. So she's done some really interesting things there, including she had a lovely maguro nigiri, so just like the ahi tuna, over a little, hand-pressed piece of rice. Despite the weakness of her fingers, she was able to do it. And it had little yellow shavings that were from a cured egg yolk. And she uses miso and salt to cure it down and basically strip the moisture out. And it comes to sort of like a firm cheese texture almost. And it's grated with a microplaner over. And it's just a lovely combination of flavors, but really simple. And you can still appreciate the singular tastes of the ingredients rather than this sort of like cacophony of stuff. She also does, if you missed the Kyoto Dragon Roll, she has brought that on as a special, which has, again, it's a roll with a bunch of stuff in it. It's got like fried shrimp in it, and it's got salmon on top and some avocado. But looking at it now from, what she learned to do as an 18-year-old at Kyoto restaurant is so much more pared down than even what has gone on in the last, 15, 20 years in American sushi. So it's real different. And pro tip, try the cheesecake. She makes a Japanese cheesecake that is very exciting for people who love cheesecake. That includes me. And she tops it with, it's much fluffier. It's got lots of whipped egg whites and whatnot. And she topped it with a miso caramel sauce, which was very lovely and just a little bit different and really playing with a tradition and playing with flavors and exploring what you can do with miso, which was really lovely.
I'm really excited to try her menu. And Jennifer, thank you again for a wonderful story this week. That wraps up for our time for this week. And of course, the current edition of the North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick up your copy today and read all of these highlights as well as all of the other stories. You can also, of course, find it online at northcoastjournal.com. I am your host, Tanya Schrum, and thanks for being with us and supportive of our North Coast community. Thanks, everyone.